Hi, and welcome back to the Tamarack Sew Along. In our previous few lessons, we attached either our hood or our collar. In today's lesson, I'll be walking you through the process of finishing the front hem edge up and around your collar or hood. What you're going to need for today is your jacket and your bias binding that you made. So, what's going to happen is we're going to start over at the notch as we did for the back. We're going to bind just around to the corner. I'll show you how to turn the corner to make a nice even point. We'll come up, and then this part will depend on what neckline you've chosen. I'll be demoing the hood because it has both an external and internal corner, but if you're using the collar, you would just keep going, and same thing for the neckline. You just continue around as we would do in here. So let's get started. All right, so to start, take your binding and you're going to unfold one edge. That's going to align with your notch. Continue pinning around as we did for the back, rounding the curve but not stretching to gather. Now here at the corner, we're going to do things a little differently. Rather than sewing to the edge, we're going to mark where our 1/2 inch seam allowance is for the center front and put a pin in there. Make sure you're pretty accurate. And we're going to sew up to that point and then back tack. All right, so here we are at the machine. I have my giant trail of bias binding. And we're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance right in that first fold. Now we're approaching our pin, so we're going to sew to our pin that marks our seam allowance. We're going to back tack, and then we're going to clip our threads. So here we have our binding. What we're going to do is we're going to fold it so it falls straight up, and this edge is even with your center front. You don't have to pin this here, it's just easier while I'm demoing. Then we're going to take our binding and we're going to fold it down over top. Pin that in place and then you'll just keep sewing. So now again, 1/2 inch seam allowance, back tack at that corner, and sew. You can pin this in place if you like. It's up to you. Make sure your seams go through flat because it'll add extra bulk. You've got a lot of jacket here, so you may need to do some maneuvering to get it out of your way. Now, if you're making view B like we are, or either view without a collar or hood, you're going to come up to the top again, stop a 1/2 inch before, and then do the pivot. If you're making view A with the collar or hood, your center front will align with the collar or hood. So you'll just continue sewing up around that. For the collar, you'll pivot again at the corner, just like you would for any other corner, and continue around. Now, since we do have a corner here, once again, I'm going to place a pin at a 1/2 inch, again our seam allowance, and stitch right up to that. Back tack, and then clip your threads. Now, once again, we need to turn our corner. So we're going to fold our binding up. There we go. Again, you don't need to pin this, it's just easier while I'm demoing. And then fold your binding down. And pin. Now, if you're making either view without the collar, at this point you'll just continue around the neckline edge, repeating your corner pivots until you get back down to the other notch. For the hood, we're going to need to do a pivot and go up around. So what I like to do is just secure this corner that I just turned. I'm just going to sew over to the point where I meet the collar. Then I'm going to back tack and clip my threads. So what I'm going to do is just mark my 1/2 inch, and you're going to clip 2, but not through that point. All right, so here you can see we've clipped into the corner there. Now what we're going to do is rotate along the clip so our hood is in a straight line with that little edge. We're just going to pin. And what you're going to do is then sew up around the hood in the same way you did for the hem and the front. Alright, so here we go. I'm going to start back a little bit where I've already sewn, just to secure my threads. And you can see how it wants to curl around. We're just going to force that straight. This is really similar to sewing a sleeve placket, if you've ever done that. There we go, we are on the hood now. And just keep sewing around. You're going to have to do a lot of rotating around the hood. our seam allowances go through flat. We don't want that extra bulk. Come back down around to our next corner. So we're just going to clip into that point. And keep sewing. Here we are approaching, so we're going to pivot. And then remember, we're going to want to stop a 1/2 inch from the corner there. So I'm just going to pin that. And here you can see we have no puckers. We have just caught the corner on both sides. Now just continue working down and back around. Now our next step is going to be to just lightly press your binding away. It should already want to fold away because of the fold that you put into it. And here you can see our corners are already starting to form. If you're working with the hood, a ham is going to make that a lot easier. Now you're going to flip your jacket over so the wrong side or the inside is facing up. And what we need to do now is fold our binding over so that it meets our stitching line. Then we're going to pin it in place, and I'm going to use glass head pins here because I don't want my pin heads to melt as I work around. Now here at the corner, we're just going to press that straight. And pin right up to it. Now we're going to work up the other side. We're just going to fold that over and you can see what a really nice point we got there. So I'm just going to press. And I'm going to pin that. So that's secure. You're just going to keep working around your jacket in the same fashion. Okay, now when it's time to do your corners, what you're going to do is just press. My binding's caught. You're binding up to that point. Just going to pin that in place. And you can see this little piece wants to cut in here. So you're just going to let that do that and fold in. See if you can see how this wants to cut into the corner. You're going to do that, you're just going to fold down, and you can see that creates a nice little mitered edge, which we're going to stitch this closed when we're done with the needle and thread. So just press that, pin, and continue working to the corner. And then again, this corner, same as all the corners before it. Press. Press over. And we have a nice little miter. So we'll just pin that and continue working down your jacket. All right, we now have our binding turned and pressed and pinned to the inside of our jacket. And there's two things you can do here. You can, one, hand stitch the binding in place if you don't want to see it on the front. Or two, what I'm going to do and what our instructions say is to stitch at your machine, just anchoring the binding in place. And we're going to do that from the right side. So again, double check that your binding meets your seam line, so that way when you stitch you'll catch it. And we'll head over to the machine and do that now. All right, so I'm using my edge stitch foot again. Just going to align that and start stitching. Back tack, and then you're going to want to take your pins out as you arrive at them. Not just because it's not great to sew over pins, but the pin will cause the guide to go a little crooked. This is a lot of jacket to work with. Clear your space, because it may knock things over like it just did for me. I'm going to remove my pin while holding that steady. I need to do one more stitch. Pivot. And then you're going to continue sewing up. Now here you can see we have a little thread hanging out. I'm just going to trim that. And just sew up until I reach the next corner. Now when you reach a corner, or an inside corner, what we're going to do is just stitch along. Remove your pin. And then you're going to pivot to continue to the next corner. Pivot again. And continue stitching. Okay, now our final step in this lesson is going to be securing this miter. As you can see on the front and the back. We just want to keep it from kind of going all over the place. So I'm going to start. I have a needle with thread. I'm going to bury my knot underneath the binding. And I'm just going to gently whip stitch this closed. You can slip stitch if you like. I just, for some reason, like to whip stitch this. I don't know why. I feel like it's a little easier and just a little more secure. And you can see we're enclosing that extra binding. And we're just working our way around to the front. Now in the front I am slip stitching, because now that that extra is enclosed, it's very easy to slip stitch. I'm going to put my needle again to the back. I'm going to knot my thread. I like to do this by stitching in place 3 times. These knots just really never come out. And there you can see we have a nice miter. All right, so that is it for today's lesson. The center front and hem are bound, And in our next lesson, we will be setting our sleeves and sewing up our side seams. So we're almost done. So I'll see you back here for that. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments below and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any of our video updates, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye-bye.